You know, some people get promoted and some don't. And one of my friends who's never got promoted, his name is, I'm just kidding. I'm not gonna tell you, can't tell you that, but there are reasons why people get promoted and why some don't. We'll talk about them in this video. Hey, my name is Michael Thompson. On this channel, we discuss personal and professional development from a Christian perspective. And the reason why some people get promoted and some don't is they fall into a certain quadrant of what's called the will-skill matrix. Now we're gonna break down the 4 different quadrants that make up this matrix. We'll start in the top left quadrant, work our way around to the final quadrant, and then the top right, which is also the final quadrant, that's where the most effective people spend their time. The top left quadrant is the high skill and low will quadrant. This is somebody who's good at what they do, but they don't have a lot of motivation to continue to grow. It's almost like they're passive in growing and developing in the task or in the job, but maybe they've been doing it long enough or they're just gifted, and so they are actually a skilled person, but they're not really motivated. And the reality is, a lot of people are like this. Some people, they've mastered the job, as I mentioned earlier, just because they've done it for a really long time. And it's, at the end of the day, really a waste of talent, because this person, if they were just more motivated or they had more willpower, they'd be able to do so many more things, but their drive, their will, holds them back. And we all know this kid in sports growing up who's the best, but he never really works hard. This is a good example of there's a high skill there, but there's not a lot of will, not a lot of motivation. What's the solution to being in this quadrant? Well, other people can't motivate you. You have to learn how to motivate yourself. And you know, some people, they're just dealt a bad hand. They have a bad growing up. They don't really have great role models in their life. And that is a factor, but that's not everything. And if you're an adult, it's important to not play the victim. Don't assume that the reason you are where you are in life is just because of your parents or just because of the environment that you grew up in. That's a factor. I'm not saying it's not a factor, but if you always view yourself as a victim, then you're not gonna become a highly intentional, a highly skilled, and have a lot of will in your job. So don't be somebody who's always playing the victim. And some people, they have high skill, but they're kind of a waste of talent because they don't have a lot of willpower or a lot of drive to continue growing and developing. So the next quadrant is low skill and low will. So this is the person who, for lack of a better way of saying it, they're not good at what they do and they're not really trying to get much better at it. An example of this could be some people that are in manual labor jobs their entire life, and they're always having to be managed, because it's not a problem at all to be in a manual labor job, but if you're not able to work without somebody else making you work, you're always gonna be held back in life, and you cost your employer a lot of money because your employer isn't just paying you to do the job, they gotta pay your manager half of your wage to watch you do your job. So these jobs can, sometimes they can be convenience store jobs or anything that you can have a teenager do and they can do it on the first day. Some of these jobs, they're built to basically fit the personality that's not necessarily high skill or high will. And there's nothing wrong with doing those jobs, but if you're wanting to grow and develop and move into a different area, then you have to be able to work without being supervised. You have to be able to grow in your skill. And a lot of times growing in your skill is a result of having some drive, having some desire to get a little bit better, not just stay in the same spot. So the solution to this specific quadrant is you gotta ask yourself, why are you here? Make a decision to work on yourself and grow in your skill set. And maybe you've heard the phrase, you can only steer a moving ship. And at the end of the day, other people, they can't motivate you. So you have to learn how to set a goal in your life, know what you want, and move towards that direction so that you're not always gonna be in that second quadrant, a low skill and low will. So the bottom right quadrant, remember we're moving counterclockwise, and we're here in the bottom right quadrant, and that quadrant is high will but low skill. This is somebody who's like really passionate. They're the most passionate in the room. They always say that they're the most passionate in the room. Never mind, I don't think anyone in particular, but they're not really that skilled. These people, they fall perfect with the illustration that comes up in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's written by Stephen Covey. He tells a story of 2 different guys that are cutting down a tree. One guy goes out and man, he just starts cutting on that tree first thing in the morning, and he doesn't take any time before he gets going to plan, he just starts cutting. The second guy, he doesn't just start cutting the tree, he sharpens his saw most of the day. and he cuts down the tree in like a fifth of the time as the first guy. And then the first guy comes over to take a break, he's out of breath, he's whooped, and he finds that the second guy has already cut the tree down. And the point is that you should spend a majority, if you're gonna do any task, you should spend a majority of time preparing to do the task, not just jumping right into it. And these people that are high will and low skill, normally there's a lack of preparation. They're the most driven person, but it's not their drive that holds them back, it's the fact that they're not really good at what they do. And they tend to talk a lot, but then when you look back over their history, not a lot of evidence of being effective. The solution to this particular situation is you gotta improve your skill. One of the ways that you can improve your skill is to prioritize learning. There's a stat out there that the top people in every field, they spend about 90 minutes learning in their field every single morning. And if you're gonna be somebody who's gonna improve your skill, say you're very driven, but you're not really skilled, then learning needs to take place. That can be in the morning, and if you're in one of those jobs that you're paid hourly, then you may not necessarily be able to work learning into your paid time. That may be something that you have to do before work or you have to do after work, but if you're going to increase your skill, you have to prioritize learning. Another tip that you can do to prioritize learning is make a plan and then do something every single day to build momentum towards accomplishing what you had as a goal that you were planning. And Brian Tracy talks about this concept in Eat That Frog. And another thing that you can do is adjust your job to include time for preparation. As I mentioned earlier, you may not get paid for this at first, or if you do get to decide what you do in your job, then build in learning as part of getting your job done. One of the things I've done recently to include preparation in my job is to read about preaching before I actually go out and preach the sermon. Instead of just having the sermon ready and then letting her fly, I try to spend just a few minutes, 10, 15, not a super long time, reading about different techniques in preaching. And at the end of the day, my job as the preacher is say what God said. And some of the things that I work on are just removing some of the distracting things that I do, some of the words that I say over and over again, so that God's word can come and it can be very, very clearly presented. Well, that's an example of working in preparation, working in some of those learning techniques into just my weekly system. Like I said, you may not get paid to do that in your job whenever you first start, but that's something that you can shoot for. Another thing you can do is write things down, okay? Write things down in a calendar. Also, write things down in journal type documents and review those. One thing that I have definitely done is I've said over and over again, how my morning goes determines how my week goes, and how my week goes determines how the projects I execute, whether I do a good job or bad job. And over and over and over again, I noticed that starting at a certain time in the day is by far the biggest factor. Well, I have literally annoyed myself because I've gone back in my journals. I'm like, how many times do I need to write this down before I actually get this straight and do this consistently in my life? But that comes as a result of actually writing things down. If you don't write things down, you forget, and then we all tend to view ourselves more optimistic than we should, as seen with every single parent that talks about their kids playing sports. I'm not thinking of anybody in particular. Last thing you can do is see seasonal patterns and then adjust. I tend to not be as good at executing in the summer. Moving into next year, my wife and I talked about how we can do some different things to set ourselves up for a different kind of a summer next year. And we've had a great summer, but they're just little things that we notice. And honestly, a lot of that comes from seeing a seasonal pattern, and seeing that seasonal pattern a lot of times comes from writing things down. Write things down, be intentional. Without any further ado, the top right quadrant, this is the best place that you want to be. These are the highest, most effective people. It's the high skill and the high will quadrant. And the truth is, these people, they're motivated and they're good at what they do. They're not just like the guy that talks a lot, and he's not real good at what he does. And it's also not like the person that is really good at what they do, but they're kind of leaving a lot in the tank because they're a little bit lazy or whatever. And these people, they're skilled, they work hard, and the result is there's a track record. They don't make excuses. They tend to see difficulty in their job as an opportunity to grow. They're not complainers. They're also not afraid to fail. They go the extra mile. They do the hardest things first in the day. They don't procrastinate, or at least they work on not procrastinating, because that's something we naturally do as humans. They have effective morning routines, and the last thing I wrote down is they see time as their most valuable asset. That is somebody, those different characteristics are somebody who's a high skill and high will individual. And the sky's the limit for those people. They're able to do all kinds of different things, and it's really cool because they take the time that they spend working, they get better and better and better at their job so they can accomplish more and more. And then almost kind of like finances, they reinvest that time into growing and becoming more effective in their job and doing more things. And over time, their willpower is able, they're able to expand their willpower all kinds of different ways because it's not that hard for them to execute their consistent routine. You get the idea. So if you want to be somebody who's high skilled and high willed, you do have to watch out for a few things. One of them is the temptation of success to make you comfortable. Comfort is the enemy of success, and if you get really intense, you're a high skill, high will person, you gotta be careful because if you achieve, then you may forget that it's the journey that's the actual joy. And when you're gonna have to fight against that temptation. When you're comfortable, you have to make sure that you keep yourself uncomfortable and do new things. Talking to a friend today who said, back yourself into a corner so that the only way that you're able to move forward is by getting out of that corner. And a lot of people, they never get to that spot where they're kind of so successful that they have to fight against comfort. But man, that is a reality. And I'm definitely not there. I know some people that are. They get several years under their belt where they're good at something, they work really hard, and the temptation is to stop growing. And so that's one thing you gotta watch out for. Another thing, if you're gonna be one of these people who's a high-skilled and high-willed individual, it's important to give back. In the Christian community, we call this discipleship. The point of being a Christian is not just to be a fat Christian, somebody not large, not like, size wide, but not just to be someone who knows a bunch of things about Christianity, but actually do things with what you know. And if you're gonna be a high-skilled, high-willed person, then look out for other young people or other people that maybe they're not young, but they wanna be where you're at, and invest in them. Because the point of whatever you do, it shouldn't just be for yourself. Because if you never give back, then that's such a purposeless way to live life. Now, the last thing I wrote down is if you're gonna be someone who's high-skilled and high-willed, the last thing you need to watch out for is that you don't climb the wrong ladder. Now, this happens when somebody gets so focused on something and they are climbing the ladder, they're doing really good in what they're focused on, all their time goes to it, but then they get to the top of the ladder and they realize it's leaned up against the wrong building. Now, that illustration comes out of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And if you're so focused on your work that you aren't there for your family, you're climbing the wrong ladder. If you're so focused on your paycheck that you don't have good relationships with all the people that work for you or that you work with, you're climbing the wrong ladder. And if you're gonna be a high-skilled, high-willed person, make sure that you climb the right ladder. Well, hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video about the 4 different quadrants of the skill-will matrix. Pick which quadrant you're in, and remember that where you're at now is just a delayed picture of what you've been doing the last few years, and then take the action steps to get out of that quadrant into the quadrant you wanna be. And if you're in the right one, make sure your ladder's not leaning up against the wrong wall. So I mentioned the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in the video, and I actually did a book review on that book. If you wanna watch it, just click here, and we'll see you guys next time.